Welcome to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. Our goal is to help you maximize your church's potential. You'll hear from top leaders in children's, student, and family ministry about the principles and practices they use. Now here's your host, Nick Blevins.
Well, hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm Nick. I'm your host, and it's episode 60. And in this episode, I talk with Amber Baker. And Amber and I talk about the Real Colors personality assessment that Amber and her team use. She's a big fan of it. We talk about what it is, how they use it, and how it can help them grow as a team. And then we kind of shift gears and we talk about women in ministry. Amber is actually the first female pastor on staff at her church. And so we talk about what that was like and some of the barriers there. And so many of you are probably in a context where that's a tension or a disagreement, or maybe it's just something you haven't talked a lot about. And Amber and I talk about that. You can get all the links and things we talk about in the show notes at nickblevins.com/episode 60. If you don't subscribe to the podcast, I would encourage you to subscribe. It's the easiest way to make sure you see what's coming every week. And there's some exciting things we're working on coming down the pike here that I hope will be helpful to you as ministry leaders, to help you lead better, to help you break through barriers, get your ministry to where you want it to be. So stay tuned. There's some things in development. Summer's a great time for that. And so I can't wait to share some of that with you. But let's go ahead now and jump into my conversation with Amber about the Real Colors personality test and women in ministry. Well, today I'm joined by Amber Baker. Amber, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks. Thanks for having me.
You bet. How about you tell us a little bit about yourself and your family and your church?
Sounds like a plan. Hey, my name is Amber Baker, and I am the children's pastor at Grace Church of Glendora in sunny Southern California. But my pride and joy is my family. So let me start there. I've been married to Josh for a little over 20 years, and we have 4 wonderful children. I have a 17-year-old daughter who's about ready to graduate high school. I have a son that's in the middle of junior high, full preteen all the way, and then 2 11-year-olds, little boys. And my house is very rarely clean, often stinky, and full of entertainment all the time. So we love our family. Both my husband and I are in full-time ministry here at Grace Church of Glendora. I have been on staff for 3 years and love it. It is exactly what our heart's desire has been, to be a part of a family. We love church as family. And so Grace has been that to us. I have been in full-time ministry for over 20 years at 4 different churches. So I've had lots of different contexts and experiences, and I have watched children's ministry change, and it's been an amazing ride. Let's see, what else? I am the first woman on staff to be hired as a pastor, so that's been a fun road here at Grace. Grace has been in existence for 60 years, and I kind of broke the mold, and so that's been a fun journey. And on my free time, part of my free time, I also get to be an adjunct professor at Azusa Pacific University. So that's been cool to hang out with college students who are learning and growing in the world of ministry and how to make it practical. So just a little bit about myself. I stay busy.
Yeah, I bet. That's awesome. What's your husband's role on staff?
So my husband's role is the pastor to elementary children. So technically I'm his boss, and that's fun.
Yeah, that's fun.
We actually work really well together. I know some husbands and wife teams couldn't work 24/7 together at home and at work, but Josh and I have for years worked really well together. We complement each other. It's a good space where I can bounce ideas off, but he's a great strategic thinker, and so he helps in so many different ways. So he oversees all of our elementary, but I oversee all of Kidman.
That's awesome. Cool. Well, we're going to talk about 2 pretty big different topics, right? We're going to talk about the Real Colors personality temperament assessment tool and how you've used it, why you like it. And then we'll shift gears and talk about women in leadership, which is great with you being the first female pastor at that church. You have a unique perspective on that for sure, which will be fun. So to start off with the Real Colors thing, explain to anybody who isn't familiar with it, like what that is, how that tool works, and what that looks like.
Great. So Real Colors is a personality temperament test and tool that you can use for teams, for families, in marriages and parenting, to understand your own personality, temperament, your style, the way you communicate, the lens in which you look at life through, and then that of the people around you. It's a fun, interactive training that I love to do with groups of people. And we figure out who we are and how we lead, and then how to communicate with one another. So within Real Colors, there are 4 distinct personality temperaments, and they are gold, blue, green, and orange. And most of the time, we operate out of our top 2. We are all 4 because God has created us that way, but we operate easily, usually out of our top 2. You want me to explain what the 4 different pieces are?
Yeah, definitely. I think that'd be great. I think for some people, they've never heard of it. I've told you that we probably do, I think, 7 different assessments with like oncoming staff at our church, but this isn't one that I'm familiar with. So I've heard of it before and the colors and what they mean, but yeah, it'd be great to hear about each one. I have to admit, I did not expect gold to be one of the colors. I totally thought it was going to be like red, blue, green, or I don't know. You know what I mean?
Yep. No, I totally get it. So there are 4 colors, like I said. So 1 are gold. Golds are your people who are your to-do list folks. They're task oriented. They're natural fixers. They're often black and white, definitely rule followers. They tend to be savers. They are ones that when you say, who is your family to a gold, their family is their immediate, their immediate family. That is family. Then you have the blue, and the blues are your relational people. They love people. They love to get to know you. They want to make sure you feel comfortable in a group. They often wear their emotions on their sleeve. They are great communicators. They listen well. They see the whole picture. Often they tend to be on the creative side. And they want, on a team perspective, they want to make sure that, say in a meeting type, that they feel the room. They sense the room of the emotions and who's connecting and who's not connecting. When you ask a blue who their family is, it is going to be their immediate family, their extended family, their neighbors, 3 doors down, their cousin's cousin. So family to blue is huge. Then you've got green, and greens are very logical. They are calm, cool, collected. They kind of operate at a 72 degrees all the time. They are often quiet and observing. They're analytical and data driven. They don't make quick decisions. They need to think about it. I joke with one of our staff members who's green that he gets in what I call analysis paralysis, where he will just start to think, and needs to be pulled out of that loop sometimes that he gets. Greens can be very guarded. And so when you ask who their family is, it's their very close family. They often don't have lots of friends. It'll probably just be a small group of deep, deep friendships. And then you have your oranges, and your oranges are fun, loving, loud, crazy group of people. They are competitive. They value fun. They are risk takers. So if you have an orange, they want new ideas. They want competition. They want to troubleshoot quickly. They're optimistic and generous. They're often funny or impulsive. So oranges bring life to the party. And again, they also are the creative side. So your oranges and blues are creative. And so they will be flexible and love fun. That's really the word that describes orange. So those are just kind of a simplistic version of the 4 different colors. And you operate out of your top 2. So for instance, I'm a gold blue, which means I love to-do lists and structure and dependability. Like I want to be dependable. If you tell me a meeting starts at 9:00, I'll be there at 8:50 because showing up at 9 is late. So golds tend to be punctual. But then I have this other side of me where I can't live in that gold world too long because then it gets so boring because golds tend to be very boring. And I need to swing over to that blue where I want to have fun and I want to be able to use my creative side, and I care about people and their emotions and how they're feeling connected. So sometimes I'll swing back and forth between the two. I can do that sometimes without even thinking. Sometimes it's intentional where I know that I'm just too stressed because I'm worrying about too much to-do list and I'm not connecting enough with people. So anyway, those are just some 4 colors. Those are how the 2 colors work out in my world. In my husband, he's a gold green. So he's a really great strategic thinker. Like I said, when we get in little, I wouldn't say arguments, but little conversations about things, I know that to ask him a question and then he stops. He needs some space to think through the answer. I can't expect an answer right away. So that's how it kind of plays out in our world. My daughter is an orange, so she is spontaneity all the way, and which, as a teenager has gotten her into a little bit of trouble as she's learned to figure out balance of different things in her life. But she's one that says, Mom, let's go to the mall. And in the gold world, I think through all the details. I think, okay, it's going to take us 20 minutes to get there. Then we have to find a parking space. Then the mall will only be open for 30 minutes. Is it really worth it? Where that's not what she's looking for. She's looking for this spontaneity fun. And so as a parent, I have to adjust to that to make sure that I'm connecting with her in that way. So that's a little bit about the different 4 colors and how they work out in my world.
So you're gold blue. Which one would be the least you, green or orange?
Green. Well, now that I say that, I would, gosh, that's a hard one. I think it depends on what season of life I'm in. If I'm in like crunch mode where we're working on some big projects at home or at work, I would say orange would probably be my least. My favorite story about me trying to be orange is I remember going to summer camp or winter camp one year, and I knew there was going to be tons of snow, and I don't like to be wet. I don't like to be cold, but I knew the girls in my cabin were going to want to be outside and in the snow all day. So I had to plan to have fun in a true gold manner. So I went out and made sure that all of my, clothes were going to keep me warm and dry. And I purposely went for the weekend knowing that I was going to play outside in the wet snow all the time. And I was going to have fun. And you know what? I did. I had a blast with the girls. But sometimes in my gold world, I have to mentally get into the place that I need to be orange. And the beautiful thing is that God has created us all 4. And so we can tap into that. When I was doing my master's degree, I definitely had to tap into my green more than what came natural, that data and research, the analytical thinking. And I found that when I got in that space, I loved it, but that's not where I wanted to live. So
as I listened to you do them, I thought, I know where I'm going to go. And then I'm like, I don't know what I am. There was and I've done a number of different profiles, the DISC or Myers-Briggs, and we were talking before we recorded how a lot of them are 4 categories.
Right.
The path elements profile with earth, wind, fire, water, that kind of thing, with the different animals, whatever. A lot of them end up in 4 categories. And a lot of them that I've seen are very similar. In the sense that it's the same thing, just call it an animal as opposed to this. But this doesn't seem to, at my first blush, doesn't seem to correspond directly with a lot of those. So that's why when I'm looking for myself, it's a little harder to figure out what I'd be. I need to take it and see what that might be.
Yeah, that'd be great.
I definitely, because I guess the challenge for me is I know I'm not blue. That's probably last, and I wasn't sure if it's gold because I do like to-do lists and that structure and things like that. I am analytical. That is my number one strengths finder. So that is for sure. Orange is probably not. Orange is probably third because I don't know that you would. It'd be great if you'd thought fun when you thought of me, but that is probably not what you do. You do probably think competitive and risk taking though. So that's where if you had that in a different category,
sure.
That'd be easier to figure out where I am in there. That's cool. Yeah.
But the greens can definitely be, there can be that part of green that, might be able to fit in that, but you're analytical. If you operate naturally out of analytical and you're dependable and you're prepared and you're organized, so that's the green gold for sure. But you can definitely tap into that orange.
This is a funny story. I had a moment when the first time I ever took any of these tests, it was at my home church. I want to say 22 years old or 23 years old. And we had somebody come in and kind of do leadership training with our whole church. And at the time I served on our church council as an extra member, so to speak. I wasn't there to represent leading any ministry or any specific thing. They would have like 3 extra people, and I was one of them, and I guess it was probably to help represent younger folks and all that stuff. And so we did this thing, but with a lot of people. It was probably like 50 people in our church. And I just remember we all stood in the corner, and I don't remember which one it was, but I want to say it was the disc profile, but I'm not 100%. And that was an enlightening moment for me, because I ended up in the corner with all of the guys who if you were thinking of how you would label them, your thought, you would have had, this is going to sound harsh, but the word jerk would have been in there somewhere. So for me at 23 years old, that was like a warning sign of like,
yeah,
all right, I'm going to have to be careful, because otherwise, I might end up being labeled the same way. So usually if I'm looking at these profiles, I'm also looking for that person. Like, if unchecked, which one is the one that's going to be, that person. So, and that doesn't exactly, like, I didn't see that in the description you said there.
But every strength or every temperament has a shadow side, right?
Yep.
So in any of these types of temperaments, your gold, your shadow side of your gold is that you can be so rigid and so focused on the to-do and the task that you run over people. You think you're right all the time, and you just take over. The negative, or the shadow side of blue, is if you can be so swayed by other people's emotions or caught up into that. Another shadow side of the blue is what they call blue ballistic, where you take all these people's emotions. Maybe somebody's mean to you. You take it, and then you hit your limit and you go crazy and you just blow up. And then the problem, when you blow up, then you feel horrible again. So it's a shadow side of green is, that analytical. You can be kind of a hermit on your own. You can, and greens always like to be right also. So you can use your intellect to plow people over. And then orange, the shadow side is you can be so spontaneous and so fun that you end up hurting the team or yourself because you don't think through steps.
Yeah, that's definitely not me. So I'm some version of gold green is what I probably am if I took the test. I don't know what order, but probably one order. And I think for anybody who's listening who hasn't taken this, but maybe they're familiar with something else, I think part of the benefit, obviously, like you're going to talk about, is using it with your team. That's one reason why you love Real Colors, because it's designed to be like done in a team. So I'd love to hear about like how you use it with your team, together when you do it, in practice after you've done it, and even like onboarding new folks. Because like I mentioned, our new staff, we put them through a bunch of assessments, which they probably think we're crazy. But some of it's just the team that's been there for a long time. We've been through all of them, and it's just helpful. It's just another filter. You know what I mean? So how have you used this, and why do you specifically like using Real Colors with the team?
Yeah. So when I first started in children's ministry, I was right out of college, and ministry was so siloed. I was kids department, then there was the youth pastor, and it always seemed to be, we often would be in competition with each other, not intentionally. It's just a structure in which the church was set up. And so it's been really fun to watch ministry change over the last 20 years. And what I love about the place where I personally am right now is how much that is not the case. We are very much a life stages team. That's the term we use here at Grace. And I love it. And so when we took it as a life stages team with some of our key volunteers, it was so eye-opening for everybody to understand, so when you act this way, you're not really just being a jerk, you're being green, right? Or when you're loud like that, you're not just trying to annoy me, that's actually part of your temperament. And so it was very eye-opening, almost like putting on a pair of glasses for the very first time when you get your very first prescription, and all of a sudden everything is clear. And that's what it was for our team. And then the great thing is that we've been able to use that common language. We've created a common language throughout our team to be able to use it. So for instance, sitting in a meeting and we're going round and round about a situation, one of our staff members is very blue. And so he's approaching it from a blue perspective. Another staff member is green, and he's approaching the same. It was literally about the intro to a video, how to introduce a video. So we're talking about minor details, but they were going round and round about how to introduce this video. And we could stop and say, okay, wait a minute, you're approaching it from a blue perspective and you're approaching it from a green perspective. And we can keep talking, but we're just going to go round and round. So how can we come to a happy medium, or how can we figure out which way to go? And so it gave us a common language for us to recognize our own viewpoints and our temperament and how to move from there. So that's how we use it. I also love it within parenting because God has created each of our children so unique and so differently, and yet all in His image. And so it helps as parents to understand, oh, I can really help with my kid. Like my daughter's orange. I have twins. They're 11. So they look identical. They're exactly the same, but they have such different personality and temperaments, and it helps us parent better. So anyway, within a team perspective, it gives you a common language. It allows you to work out some of the details, and it helps me know how they're going to respond. So sometimes if we're going to have difficult conversations, I can think through, we all change and we're all different, but I can think through, okay, I know that they're going to respond this way due to their temperament. And so when communicating an idea, how do I make sure that I hit all 4 temperaments? If I go to my boss and he is not a green, I can't go with him to all the data and research because not that he doesn't care, but that's not his first excitement. He's more orange. And so he wants to see the fun in it. He wants to see how it's advancing something, how there is some life to it. If you give him data, he'll say no thanks right away. So sometimes it's how you communicate to those around you that's just such a benefit.
And that's obviously helpful that as a church, this is what you've used. So like we're over here, we use a bunch of them, which is nice, but it takes a lot that doesn't take a lot. I guess it takes having gone through all the assessments and then talked about them to know them well enough. Like I don't think we know any of them as much as you would know one because you've picked one and it's like your thing. So you're saying everybody in the church, all staff kind of do it, or is it mostly just your team?
So we've just done it as a life stages team. So that's youth past junior high, high school, kid min, and then our leads within our departments. So we keep saying to the big church staff, hey, let's all do this. And the life stages team, we laugh a lot about that, pegging our other employees that we work with and their colors.
Guessing what they are. Yeah.
Guessing what they are.
No, he's blue. No, I think he's orange. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But it really has helped within our, the next gen kind of age group and our key leaders.
So when somebody comes on, do you have them, like if you're interviewing a candidate, do you have them do this even before they come on and you kind of get a feel there? Yeah. Yeah.
Because then that helps the team. I got to spend a week with a church in Georgia last year and doing real colors and some temperament and training with them. And talking with the senior pastor, they had a ton of oranges and blues on their team, and they had 1 gold. And so they were talking about the next position that they hire. And so my suggestion is you need to find somebody that's more gold, because if not, you have these people that have great ideas. Blues and oranges have tons of creative ideas, but they can't get it done. It just stays in that creative space, and you need those greens and golds to implement the ideas. And so it can really decide anything like Real Colors or any of the others can help you manage, the right team member to come on board when you have an opening.
Yeah. And I think having the balance is good if you can do that. We did years ago, our church had done one called Leading from Your Strengths. And part of it is at the end, you do plot it on a kind of a circle with 4 quadrants. And it wasn't a surprise. I think we kind of knew, but there was a whole, quarter of the circle that was unrepresented. And in fact, it was probably more than a quarter if you spread past that. Because even some of the other quarters, we were leaning even further away. And when you heard what that person was like, you were like, oh yeah, we don't have that. That's why we've been having a hard time with all this stuff. And for us, it was probably the natural makeup of somebody to be a good admin. A lot of churches are heavy on that, or they start with that. And that just wasn't our church model. And it wasn't a surprise. When that was empty, it was yeah, that makes sense. We're struggling there. We got a lot of ideas and dreamers and people, and not a ton of that. So that was helpful. It's just eye-opening as a reminder. That's good.
Yep. Balanced team is always so great.
Yes. Is there anything else that you'd want to say about kind of the Real Color stuff before we change gears?
Well, as you can tell, I love it. I'm a certified trainer. And so I've done it for parenting groups and schools and different churches. So if anybody's interested in more information, you can definitely send them my way.
Yeah. And you mentioned too, how unlike maybe some other ones, it is best to do this one with a trainer for the group. Cause if you can, it really is all about that experience together with someone from the outside walking you through it, as opposed to just go take it online and then we'll talk about it later.
Yeah, the cool part about this is that the training is so much fun. It's not sit and listen to somebody speak for 3 hours. It's this very interactive, fun training. I love doing it because so many times you will literally just see light bulbs connect, like, oh, that's why you're that way. And it's just this really, it's a fun couple hours together.
That's good. I know we did. I don't know if this has this. Does it give you, so it gives you some descriptions, obviously, of what that personality's like, how to lead them, how they work with others. Does it give you like descriptive sentences? Cause I always find that one to be funny. That leading from your strengths does that. And obviously they're kind of recreated. They're sentences that have been written and then they just apply to certain types. So sometimes you'll see the same one in different profiles, or obviously if anyone's in that quadrant, they're going to get the same sentence. And those are always funny when, even if they're not a sentence and it's fully descriptive, it's funny to read it when it's a little bit detailed and it's completely right. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
This person likes to, I remember I've heard Carey Nieuwhof say one of his told him that he likes to work out of multiple offices. And he was like, what? How did you know that? Like,
exactly.
Like those are really funny when they have that kind of level of accuracy.
Yeah, you just go, what in the world? Are you reading my mail?
Yep. That's crazy.
Yeah.
I love assessments. Obviously, we do way too many of them. So I think they're really helpful. I need to check this one out. This is one that I haven't done yet, but I think it would be a lot of fun.
Yeah, it is.
As we switch gears and kind of talk about women in leadership, you have that unique experience of being the first female pastor on your staff at your church there. Before we jump in and kind of talk about some of the specifics of it, I'd love to hear what that process looked like. How did that go? I mean, this can be a really divisive issue in churches. Up where I am, we had a church that launched a campus of their church, which is not common around here. There's not many churches that are multi-site, and this was well before anybody had done that. And it was pretty far away. It was actually from one state to the next, but it was only 20 minutes. And this issue, they didn't have women elders. So we're talking about not just women in leadership, but women as elders. And they decided to move to having women and elders. And I don't think they communicated it well and like approached it in steps to help, educate people, bring people along the whole thing. Ended up being that church kind of separated, became its own plant, which, in the long run might be fine. But that's an example of how like it can be really divisive. It can be a much smoother thing. That's probably not the norm. So I'd love to hear like what it looked like for you and your church, particularly being the first time.
Yeah. So let me give you a little backstory. I started in ministry as a kids pastor right out of college, like I said, and I knew nothing else other than women in ministry because the church I was at believed in it, championed it. It was just part of the culture of my formative years as a children's pastor. So I didn't come in contact with a lot of people that didn't believe in that, other than I'd go to certain different, what are they, like conferences and stuff. And I'd noticed that a lot of the women I would meet were children's ministry directors and not children's pastors. Yep. But honestly, I didn't really think much of it. And so then we came into a season where we needed to step out of ministry for a while. We had just been hurt and burned, and it just was a time where God was preserving and refocusing us. So my husband and I stepped out of full-time ministry for 4 or 5 years, and it was probably the most difficult but the most wonderful time of our life in our spiritual walk and just in refiguring out our calling and what God was calling us to do. And so I started, when I went back to full-time ministry, again, I went to a church that believed in women in ministry. In fact, that church now has its a Nazarene church out of Pasadena, and they have their first woman senior pastor, first time in the history, and it's 100 and something years old. So the Nazarene church believes in women in ministry. So I was at that church and loving it, but when God begins to move, at least for me, in certain things happen in a repeated pattern, I begin to pay attention to what God is doing. And so I sensed that God was bringing some change. To be honest, I didn't expect it to be me. And because I was very happy with where I was and what God was doing there, and our family was there. But one week I got 3 job offers across my desk asking me to apply. And so that caused me to go, whoa, Lord, what are you doing? And then spent some time with my husband, and we prayed and sought God on what are you doing? So I just began to pursue these job applications and just see what the Lord was saying. And one of them was Grace. And Grace had a kids pastor when I started, and he's a fantastic guy, still works at Grace. And so the way Grace changed their culture here is they brought me on as the second kids pastor. So we were equals and over different with using our strengths. And so that was one of the ways that they strategically moved Grace to a new perspective. And I think that was smart. It worked because of our personalities. It wasn't easy at times, but it truly became out of a relationship I had already had with a kids pastor. They needed somebody that was more on the gold side. They needed somebody that was able to get things done, because the previous kids pastor is very relational and creative, but just struggled with some of the organizational part. So I came on as a second. And so the interesting thing is, when I started here, many, 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 many times people called me his assistant. And a lot, or wouldn't call me Pastor Amber. They call me Miss Amber. And so it was just, and I have grace for that. I understand. I am not a crusader by nature. I know who I'm called to be. I know who God has created me to be, and I'll just step through those doors as he opens them. I'm not going to try to push, and I'll definitely defend myself, but I'm not going to cause fights over it. So, there are times, even now, I know we have a couple people in our church that still won't call me Pastor Amber, but they'll call me Miss Amber, and whatever,
it's because it's not, I don't know.
It's because I'm a woman.
Yeah. It's on purpose.
It's truly because I'm a woman, and they've been brought up that women can't be pastors. So, but as far as Grace goes, they have started shifting their culture. And when I was interviewing with the executive pastor and going over, just getting to know him, and him getting to know me and my family, they've intentionally said, no, we are calling this a pastor position because that's what she is. And so I've been here 3 years. Pastor John, my senior pastor, got an email just a week ago about me and asking why did they call me pastor? Is it because I really am a pastor, or am I more like a children's ministry director?
Yeah, and you're like, what's the difference?
Exactly. I'm caring, and I'm feeding, and I'm overseeing, and I'm shepherding. What's the difference? But there's grace to people that don't understand. Just like I would hope that people would have grace towards me in areas of my life that I still need to grow in. And so that's how I feel. That's how I came to be at Grace. And it was just this natural progression of God opening up doors. And it was really, truly through relationships. And like I said, we just love it here. It's been the best place for my family.
Are you still the only female pastor on staff, or are there others?
I am still the only female pastor on staff. Yeah.
So it is focused towards you.
Yeah. There is another lady who is the director of our small groups, and she's been on staff for a lot longer than I have, but she's not a pastor and doesn't desire to be called a pastor. So I'm it.
I think sometimes, not to get into this too much, but a lot of times you'll see the director title used but like kind of like you said, it really is like a pastor role. So then at the end of the day, what you're doing is just calling it something that to avoid the problems. But in reality, you expect the same thing.
Absolutely.
You know? Versus other churches, they'll be more, if they don't believe theologically and have female pastors, then they just wouldn't have them in that role.
Right.
So it is an interesting spot where churches kind of like, some of them are in that middle ground where it's like, we want to have that, but we don't want to call it that. So we call it, so that is interesting. We had, our church was a new church plant 11 years ago, and it wasn't like a typical church plant because we were planted from a larger church up north. So there were almost 200 people on the launch team, which is obviously already a church. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it had 5 staff, but the one lady that was like, she was a pastor for us, led multiple roles, still on our team today. She would get that where people thought she was our pastor's assistant, and it really had nothing other to do, because we had another lady who was a pastor as well. She was our small groups pastor, but the combination of 1, not knowing exactly what she did, and 2, the fact that she had oversight of like administrative stuff, made some people just make that assumption. And again, these weren't people that cared one way or the other. Like they didn't have an opinion. They just made an assumption. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Which you get all the time. I get people in our church that still call me the title or my role was 7 years ago. And I'm like, it seems like it's just normal, whatever.
Yeah.
But in your case, I'd be tempted to correct it. You say you don't push. I don't know if I'd want to correct that. I guess it's more difficult. In my case, it's like, I don't even care. It doesn't matter. In your case, it matters. And so that's where it's a little bit unique.
It matters, but it doesn't. Like, I know who I'm called to be, and so what's it going to do? What by me correcting it in that moment, what does that benefit the church family? Now, there are lots of times it does benefit. I have a good friend here, and when I came on, she's been at this church since she was a teenager. And when I came on, sweet lady, very caring to our family. And then about maybe a year into me being here, she took me out to lunch and she said, I need to confess something to you. I was like, uh-oh, okay. She said, I really struggled with you being hired as a pastor. She said, I have grown up in this church, and we were always taught years ago that was not right. But I have learned I'm wrong. And I am so sorry that in my mind, I judged you. And so I am committing from this point on, anytime I see you, I'm going to call you Pastor Amber.
Wow.
And I had never experienced anything like that. And I love this lady and her vulnerability and her willingness to learn. And, God gives gifts, and he doesn't say in his word that these gifts are only for men and these gifts are only for women. He says, here are the gifts that the Holy Spirit distributes to you. And so, I just was so proud of her that she just recognized that and was willing to be vulnerable with me and say, look, I'm sorry, and this is how I'm going to fix it.
Many people, this would probably start a theological debate or whatever, but a common approach that I'll see nowadays is that church, if you're going to, if you're going to land somewhere theologically related to this issue, it's really one of 2 camps. One is women can lead in any capacity, pastor, any capacity. The other would be they can lead in any capacity other than elders, only because of how the Bible talks about that. Now, even then, if you believe women can lead in any capacity, you have theological beliefs about what it means for elders too. Just the idea that there wasn't a female elder in the Bible. So you could land, like our pastor would say, that he would respect any church that landed in one of those 2 camps. Not that he doesn't respect the others, but he thinks that he knows people who are in both camps and understands how they get there biblically with the support, that it's not just based on some kind of a history, that they've really dug into the Bible. And then but there are obviously plenty of other churches that have other things. You can't serve communion. Women can't lead certain men. You can't lead men in class. So you definitely get into other versions of that. But he kind of believes that it's really one of those 2, that you really land in one of those 2 camps. So obviously your church, this is a way that they're in some ways getting it right. And I don't mean right theologically, but based on what they believe, so I think that's what people need to decide is what do you believe? What does your church believe theologically? And then how do you stand right by that? What are some ways that churches are getting it wrong?
Oh gosh. I think I think we forget that God has equipped us and called us all to different gifts and strengths and abilities. And I think when you deny the person to lead when they've been called to lead, I think you're missing it. You try putting it in a different perspective. If you would never tell, now in today's culture, you would never tell a little girl that if she's really great at math and science, that she shouldn't go on to be, an engineer or a scientist anymore. Now, years ago you did, right? Like, I know my mother-in-law was not allowed to go to college because her father said that's not what she should do, So I know times have changed. You would never tell a little girl she can't be a scientist now. So why in the church do we continue to tell women what they can and can't do that way? I just think that's interesting. It makes me sad when I see churches not embracing what I believe to be as God's full potential in each person. And so I think that's just some ways that sometimes we pick and choose, right? Or we're okay with certain things, but not others. And I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's probably the thing that I don't like the most. Now, on one hand, theologically, yes, there'd be lots of things that I wouldn't like. But on the other hand, I don't see that as being, that is definitely, certainly an issue. But what I see a lot of is it actually hasn't been well thought through or well supported. Like nothing, I really get frustrated when I see like a position about women in ministry and it's not even supported well biblically. It really is just the continuation of some kind of cultural precedent that nobody ever really explained why, or at least not with good biblical reasoning. And so then you hold on to it. And I find a lot of churches, there's that, but then there's some where it's like, actually, we're not holding on to anything. We just haven't even realized how we're not empowering women to lead. I mentioned a couple of years ago, I remember somebody talking about how it could, part of the factor of that could be that for right or wrong, leadership in the church is often tied with communication up front, teaching, on stage, that kind of thing. And you see a lot of young leaders getting that opportunity in, like, say, student ministry, leading student ministry, and they're mostly guys. Obviously times are changing and there are a lot more female student pastors, but you're not seeing as many. Like, they were just wondering, hey, are we not giving enough, like, girls in high school age and college age swings at teaching and communicating and things like that in order to prepare them for leadership too. So it could be like this unintentional thing where it's like, actually nobody disagrees. We just haven't prepared and equipped young women to lead either. So that's one where it's like, that's probably the thing that's a little bit more frustrating, is when it's an issue, not because of a strong theological belief, but because of just ignorance, or I don't know, haven't thought about it, or haven't been afraid to land somewhere on it, something like that.
And I understand that in so many cultures, this is just such a sticky subject. And so many times in ministry, we just keep doing what we've always done because we've always done what we've always done, right? And you forget to stop and go, oh, wait, let's look at things differently. And I think sometimes the church is a little behind in sometimes cultural changes too. And so unfortunately, we kind of get stuck in that routine and we forget to stop and ask God where we're supposed to be heading in that different area. And
there's always a fear too. This is another one. This came up. See, our church, because it was new, didn't have elders right away. We had a management team, which was people from other churches that supported our church kind of from the outside. So they served like elders, but we didn't have elders internally. So when we got elders, we had to decide all of this. What are our theological beliefs? What's the role? I mean, everything down to like, how long do you serve? To how do you get nominated? The whole thing.
Yep.
And so I really appreciate what our pastor did, because he really led our entire staff through the process so that everybody could be part of it. There could be discussions. We could look at it from every angle. And we had guests come in and give, arguments for, arguments against, on all sides. But I know even in that conversation, one of the fears is that slippery slope idea, like, well, especially if you use culture, well, okay, if we say yes to this, then why
That's true,
can't we do that? And one of the guys, he had a great line. He said, well, I hope good biblical exegesis is a slippery slope to better biblical exegesis. You know what I mean? Like the idea that like, yes, it could lead to something else, but not apart from the Bible.
Right.
Like, as long as it is the Bible that is guiding it,
exactly,
you're okay. Yes.
Yep.
If it's a pressure culturally, that's a different thing. Yeah.
Correct. And I don't mean it that way, at all. Like, just do it what everybody else is doing that way. Absolutely. God's word.
You just mean that you're right. I mean, that's true of everything with church largely, is that it takes longer to get there than everything else, it seems like, in the world, whether it's innovation, practices, this kind of stuff, anything like that. That's true. The church is usually far behind, a little slower to move. Yeah, definitely.
And I have, one of the best advocates and champions for my role has been my senior pastor and my executive pastor.
And that's key.
And totally. And that's what makes this work. Obviously, if they weren't for it, well, one, the position wouldn't have even been created, but it would make being here really difficult. But I know that I have two gentlemen in my corner that are, cheering for me, believing in me, rooting for me, and having my back with those conversations that I don't even know go on, that I'm sure, pop up here and there. So I appreciate that so much.
So for the guys who are listening, and I'm not necessarily talking about theological positions here. Right. I mean, I think an action item is, if you don't exactly know what you believe biblically, figure that out. Like, I think it's important, no matter what you believe, to know both sides of the argument biblically. Not just the loose arguments that don't really hold up, but what are the good, because there are good arguments on both sides, at least when it comes to elders. I don't know how much about the other versions of women in ministry, but so it'd be good to dig into that. But if that's not really the issue, it's more just, it's in practice. What would you say to guys who are listening, who lead female volunteers, who might lead female staff? Like, what can they do to help?
So I think the biggest thing is, comes to mind is be a cheerleader. Just like you would, and of course, that's a female term, huh? But be a support to that staff member, female or volunteer, or I think set the gender aside. People need to be needed. They want to be encouraged. They want to feel like they're able to use their gifts and callings. And so I think if we can get to a point where men are leading women well, it's allowing them to be who God's created them to be, and with some good checks and balances, just like we do the other way around. So I don't know. I just think when we can see people through the lens of how God sees us as best as we can, that we're all created in the image of God. We all have been gifted. We all have different skill sets and callings. We as leaders need to champion those things we see in the people that we lead, whether they're female or male, and being able to use their different personalities and their temperaments, and to be able to encourage in the ways that they need encouragement, give resources where they need to be resourced, high fives when they need to be high fives. So I think that's a huge part. The other part of being in a man's world sometimes is just be very careful of comments that are made, because there's nothing more what can squash a woman so fast is if there are comments that are inappropriate, especially in derogatory or sexual of nature. And I think sometimes, especially if you've been around a group of guys for a long time and you joke around in a certain way, and then you add a female to that piece, sometimes you forget that those kind of jokes aren't always appropriate, or those types of statements. And so just be very mindful of your verbiage and your words and how they come out. That makes somebody in women in ministry feel much more comfortable to be a part of. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm, definitely. I wonder the first part you were talking about there, it made me think, just the nature of this and where obviously the church has been. Mm-hmm. It makes me think that if you are a guy and you lead female staff, female volunteers, whatever it might be, if doing nothing alone hurts, like you have to be intentional to an extent in order to help lead the way in this area, because doing nothing, I'm trying to think of how to say it. It's almost like you'll accidentally put a lid on it. versus if you're at least you're intentional, you can help kind of thing.
Right. Our executive pastor always talks about the unintended consequences of decisions we make. Yeah. And I think an unintended consequence of not saying anything is actually hurting. It will actually hurt, for sure. And so being their support, being their liaison, being their, their go-to person, that just helps.
You know far more than I do that for some women who are listening, they're wrestling with this, and it could be theological. It may not be theological, it might be a practical thing. And it's hard because they're in a church setting that they love what they do. And there's just all kinds of experiences women can have where it's like, I really love this place, but then this is a big deal. Or maybe it's not to that extent. Maybe it's not like, I'm not sure if I even need to work here anymore. Maybe it's less than that, but what would you say to those women who are leading but are facing some challenges in their setting?
I think a big part that has helped me is to find other ladies in ministry. And that's not always easy, but maybe not even personally, but I like to follow certain women, ladies in ministry, and read their stuff, and especially some of the bigger name ones that I'll never know them, but man, I learned so much by just their strength and their constant encouragement to be who God has called you to be. So I think finding other women to partner with is really important. I think if you're married, having a spouse that you have a relationship to be able to share and pray together in this area makes a huge difference. I'm so thankful for my husband, who is my champion, always cheering me on, because that makes a huge difference. Another thing is finding a safe space to process, and whether that be with a group of friends or that's a professional counselor. But I think there are definitely spaces that we need to be able to process our emotions, process situations, ask advice. And so however you find that. And I know that I met a couple other ladies in town, and we'll get together for coffee and just touch base. There are some other kids pastors in Southern California that will connect on a Zoom call regularly just to stay connected, just to have a place to process information in a safe context. So I think that's it. And but resource yourself that way.
Yeah, having a community is key. I would say we've had a couple other folks on this podcast talk about this issue. Nina Schmidgall and Cindy Fiala come to mind. And I know for them, you experience the same thing, where a lot of times you'll get to talk with another lady serving in leadership, but is wrestling with this. And you're maybe one of the first people they've been able to talk to. There hasn't been anybody else. So that is a good point, that maybe the best step is reach out to somebody else in ministry, whether local or not. They don't have to be local. You mentioned a Zoom call, like that would be another way to connect, because that's probably what is really hard, is when you are doing that alone. And, and then you realize, but if you connect with other ladies, you realize, no, I'm not the only one. This is very common, and we can support each other. Yep.
Absolutely.
That's good. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, talking about these two topics, pretty distinct, but important topics. And if anybody wants to connect with you or, has some more questions, how can they do that? What's the best way to do that?
The best way to do that is just to email me at my church email address, abaker@grace-church.com.
Great. Well, Amber, thanks again for coming on the podcast. This has been really helpful.
Yeah. Thanks, Nick. Thanks for having me.
Well, that was really helpful. I appreciate Amber's comments there, and the courage and the boldness that she's had in her church. And I think her comment about finding community in a place, a safe place where you can talk with other people and process, I think is huge. I think everyone should be, as much as you can, if your community allows it. And now, of course, with digital, she mentioned they do a Zoom call there with some other kids pastors in Southern California. I think you should find a way to regularly connect with other leaders and other people where, they care about you, they care about your church, but they don't have an influence there. They don't have a stake in the game, and you can just be real and you can process that stuff. I think that'd be really good. A couple action items I thought of was, of course, one, taking the Real Colors personality assessment with your team and discussing it. Maybe you're going to bring somebody in, like she mentioned, or maybe you can find a way to do that on your own. Maybe it's another personality assessment, whatever it might be. I think those are big opportunities and helpful tools to help you grow as a team and trust each other more. Another action item would be to learn together about women in ministry. I just think all of us could learn more about why we believe what we believe and why people who believe differently than what we believe learn why they believe what they believe. Learn that other side. I think that could be really, really helpful. And it might be a conversation that we need to start, that it hasn't really been had in a long time in our church, and we need to start it. So you can get links to the Real Colors assessment and anything else we talked about in the show notes at nickblevins.com/episode 60. In next week's episode, I talk with Alex Beaverson from Mariners Church, and we talk about how they help students serve in the student ministry. So they have high schoolers that serve in the high school ministry, doing some pretty big things, taking pictures for the Instagram account and pretty much everything they do. And they have different teams, but you'll be amazed to hear all the different teams they have, how many students they have that serve, and the kind of the process they use to make that happen. So if you serve in student ministry, I'd encourage you to listen to that. If you serve in children's ministry, you should listen, because we should get students to serve in children's ministry. I know they do in our church, and it's amazing. We couldn't do it without them. So I think you'll love that. Be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next episode of the Family Ministry Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. We hope this helps you maximize your church's potential. We would love to hear stories of how you apply what you've learned. You can do that by leaving a comment on iTunes or in the show notes at nickblevins.com.